Welcome back to New Scoreboards, a version of the Be Extraordinary podcast. We have a special guest. This podcast was really started by my journey, playing sports and then transitioning into the business world and all the different challenges that I had and opportunities I had in doing that, finding transferable skills. People that were like me know that I wasn't alone in some of my struggles. And so we're joined by a special guest, Chelsea Ryckis. She's been wildly successful in the benefits world. But before that, she was a student athlete at Stetson here local to Central Florida, played softball at a very high level, and is just an overall achiever. Some of the prep that I was doing for this is just like I was kind of wowed that like every stage of your journey, whether it's graduating high school as the valedictorian or it's at college where I think you were cum laude or magna cum laude and the captain of the team. And then you go into this entrepreneur realm and of course you're succeeding. It would only make sense that you would be succeeding there too. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but we're going to talk about her story. We're going to talk about achievement. We're going to talk about challenge. We're going to talk about the brain injury that you suffered.
Yeah.
I know it wasn't always easy. And when we first met, you were kind of coming out of that and really working towards normalcy with that. But thank you so much for joining us and being on the show, Chelsea.
I appreciate it. That's quite the intro. I wish I could talk. I need to figure out a way to sum up my journey as eloquently as you did, but thanks for having me. And also, thanks for doing this, man. Like, I can't tell you how nice it would have been coming out of college, never mind the brain injury, but just having somebody realize and somebody tell me like, hey, this transition from being an elite Division I athlete to real life where no one cares that you were all those things, it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. So I think what you're doing is super special, and I'm just excited to be a small part of it today. Thanks.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I agree with you. I could have used the information too, and I think that the listener will get a lot of value from your story. And whether you're an entrepreneur or former student athlete, you're still going to get a ton of value from this episode because what Chelsea's been able to do has been nothing short of remarkable. And we were connected. It's so funny how it works. We were connected by a mutual friend and acquaintance. I think it was J.R. Reed. And he just kind of put us together, right? And JR and I aren't super close. He probably doesn't even remember it. But he put us together. Oh, you guys both played sports. You're both in business. You're both young. You guys should meet each other. And we met for coffee. And that coffee probably went an hour and a half. And we were just kind of invested in each other's story and very similar parts of our story. And then fast forward, it's probably been 6-7 years since then, right, Chelsea? I mean, it's probably been that long.
Yeah, it might even be coming up on 8 here. And something that I always found really fascinating about our businesses was we both chose the partnership route. And there's, I think that kind of goes to the whole concept of teamwork and kind of our roots growing up in that, but really finding strengths-based partnerships. And I've had a lot of fun too, man. I know you're talking about all my success, but I've had so much fun watching you guys grow and the podcast and all the different offices. So, congrats to you too. It's been pretty awesome to watch your journey.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. And it's funny, that conversation about teamwork, I was just talking to a gentleman that played football in the NFL and he was talking about how he intentionally seeks out partnership because he knows that locker room environment, that team environment is something that he gets more out of himself by intentionally putting himself in it. So let's start there. I mean, obviously you get to Stetson, had a lot of success, become captain, the whole nine. You're from Canada, right?
Yeah. Which I learned. That's a whole thing.
Yeah, which I learned. But it's so funny now that I know that you're from Canada, boom, I catch that little bit of a hint of an accent. Just a little.
Whenever I go home, so I'll go home like 2 or 3 times a year, spend a couple weeks with my family. And as soon as I come back, my employees, all my clients, they're like, whoa, you're all of a sudden Canadian again, because I just start saying all the Canadian things. But the Canadian aspect's pretty interesting, specifically with softball, because softball is not a big sport up there. But I actually started playing boys baseball with my twin brother until I was 15 or 16 years old, which if you're playing competitive sports in the US, by 16 years old, usually if you're good enough to what level you're going to play, D1, D2, D3, whatever it's going to be, NAIA. it wasn't until I was almost 16 years old that I even found out that softball was a sport. So I was actually playing, we were at a family Thanksgiving, which, by the way, Canadian Thanksgiving is not the same as American Thanksgiving. It's a whole different week. I was playing out in the backyard with my brother, just throwing the ball, and there happened to be a Team Canada scout there. And he saw me throwing, and he comes up and he's like, "Why don't you play girls softball?" And I'm like, "I didn't even know I could." And he's
At
like, "You
15, 16 years old, you really legitimately did not know there was a thing called softball. It's hilarious.
Yeah, well, and so I think too, like growing up with a twin brother, and my dad's super aggressive and coached us into sports. And I think maybe if I had heard about it, my, ego was like, I play with the boys. I'm the
Yeah.
only girl in the province,
Yep.
I'm blah, blah, blah. So it took a minute for my mindset to shift from like, I like being the only girl that plays with all the boys to everybody's getting big. I'm starting to get hurt. I'm not as good as everybody. Like it starts to be that age where there's
Mhm.
like just a gap in physical ability,
Yeah.
never mind skill set, right? So transitioned over to playing with the girls, and the first practice was hilarious because everything about softball is different from baseball. I mean,
Mhm.
the trajectory of the pitch, obviously you're with a bunch of women or young girls. It took me like a little bit of time to
Size of the
figure it out.
ball. I mean, like literally everything. Size of the
Yeah,
field. Yeah.
yeah, how far the pitcher is. But I think the hardest part was just the trajectory of the pitch, right? Like hitting a rise ball was always challenging for me,
Mm.
even when I did get to play, at the highest level in college. But it ended up being the biggest blessing of my entire life. Made incredible friends, and very quickly got onto a travel team. It's funny when I look back at kind of my journey, I've just always been really lucky to find these people who have just taken me under their wing. So I had a friend, her parents were the coaches, and the dad was a pilot for Air Canada. And he would get all these free flights to fly me and his daughter to like these prestigious camps so we
Mhm.
could learn from the top of the top. And had I not been on that team, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford to go do those things. And
Mhm.
just story after story, there's these moments in time where, I mean, literally, even getting the D1 scholarship, I was only included in the deal because the coach wanted a pitcher on my team. And my coach negotiated and said, "Hey, if you want her, you need to take a look at our center fielder." And he came to, out in Quebec, it was Canada Summer Games. He came and watched us, the Stetson coach, Frank Griffin. I made a diving catch in center field, but he was still interested in the pitcher. He had his outfield, ready
Mhm.
to go. But nonetheless, I kind of walked on. I got an academic scholarship the first like half the year that I came. And then he basically told me, he's like, "You bust your ass and you prove to me that you deserve a full ride and it's yours next year."
Mm.
And came in the middle of the year as a freshman. So I came in January, ended up replacing a senior in right field within 4 weeks, and then got a full ride the next year.
Come on.
So let's fucking go, right?
Let's go. And by the way, good for that coach. I mean, in all honesty, like I think sometimes you navigate that. Like you always think like best players should play, right?
Right.
And I think on the good teams and the good coaching staffs that is the case. But when you do have like that seniority aspect, and you have this new person that's not even on scholarship yet, that takes a certain level of like humility and detachment from that coaching staff to simply make that decision. Like the ultimate decision, like is when Tom Brady replaces Drew Bledsoe, and then they never put Drew Bledsoe back, right? It's like not
Totally.
obvious at the time. It takes a certain level of like, anyway, that's very impressive. So that's awesome.
Well, but I feel like the hard work piece has kind of always been what's in my nature, right? And you mentioned like the accolades and this sort of, valedictorian to all the things. Everything in my life I've noticed, especially when it was athletics and then academics and now work, it's been very like most athletes, like achievement recognition driven.
Hmm.
So when I find out that there's a championship that I can win, or the team captain, or lead in home runs and RBIs, like that is so incredibly motivating because I'm so competitive.
Hmm.
I think that's part of the thing that is really tough when you graduate, right? So like all of that is amazing in college, high school, you're playing your sport, you're doing your thing. But when that's over, like real life doesn't operate that way. There's not an award waiting for you
Like,
for showing up. Not that that's the awards that we got playing sports, but you know what I mean? Like there's all of a sudden you're kind of thrust into this world where like nobody really cares that you were smart in college and that you could hit the ball and all the things. So there's been a lot of work, I'd say, on the personal side of just finding my actual motivator, not that external recognition, because you know you're when you after you finish your athletic career, it's pretty hard to win these big awards. Like we'll talk about the one that just happened, but that's been my goal. I figured I'd win that by the time I was going to retire in benefits. Like I had no
Right.
idea that that was something that would happen now,
Yeah,
right?
and by the way, I saw that. So give some context to the listener. I saw it was the
Sure.
2024 Advisor of the Year in your space, and just by it looks just like a massive deal.
Yeah, it's the I would say, and most people would agree, it's the highest recognition and honor in our industry, and it's
Mhm.
not at all sales related, which is what I love about this award. Is it has nothing to do with insurance and insurance companies and selling products. It's truly about positioning solutions.
Mhm.
So to kind of catch everybody up, I do employee benefits, and my main sort of niche is designing health insurance and benefit program packages for mid to large market employers. So ultimately the goal there is to everybody knows insurance sucks, and everyone's used to this story of premiums increasing year after year, and it is what it is. Well, the truth is that isn't what it is whatsoever. There is a way to control the cost long term. There is a way for employees to actually contribute to their 401k and not have to spend their money on their health insurance raises. The problem is that the system is designed to profit from employers just accepting the status quo. Hospitals profit, insurance companies profit, pharmacies profit, brokers profit. So essentially, we came into the market 8 years ago, 7 years ago, decided we're going to do it completely differently. We're going to remove all the misaligned incentives, and we're going to build our agency the exact opposite of 90% of the brokers out there.
Mhm.
So that is how we differentiated ourselves. And then so this award is really, it's because of that. It's
Mhm.
because of actually trying to get to the root cause of the problem and do the right thing and bring solutions. They interviewed our clients, they interviewed my employees, there was case studies submitted, metrics reviewed, and then also your industry peers and colleagues nominate you, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it was a big deal. I remember sitting in the first conference I went to for Benefits Pro, which was in 2019. And I remember sitting in the stands, like watching this unfold. So they have 5 finalists on the stage, and then one gets up, one gets up, one gets up, and finally there's just one person left. And I remember sitting there, and I turned to my now husband Donovan, who was just my business partner at the time, but said to him, "I want to do that." He was like, "What? No, who cares?" And I was like, "No, no, no, like I'm gonna be on that stage." And he
Mhm.
was like, "Okay." But at the time I felt this small, like
Yeah.
I'd only had my business. I mean, you knew my first business, which, was Colonial Life.
Mhm.
Very grateful to the captive agency model and whatever. But, I transitioned very quickly into an independent business, and it was hard, man. Like I could barely pay my rent. I slept in my car. It resulted in a divorce in my first marriage. Like it was hard. And I had just come off of that. And I was like feeling like this, right? Like I couldn't even afford anything, but I'm like, I'm going to do it. So I think like to tie it back to sports, that while it's not good to always look for that external validation and recognition, I do think there's certain times where, if you're really down in the dumps, if that's what motivates you to get out of a shitty situation, like who cares, right?
Yeah. There's a quote, and I'll butcher it, but it's by the late great Jim Rohn, and he says, "Don't set goals essentially for the achievement of what it'll give you or getting that goal. Set goals for what it will make of you, for what you'll become." And I think about that story of setting this big goal when you feel very small, and then you work backwards to start asking questions. Well, how would I get on that stage? Who's on that stage? What are they doing? What would I have to do about my life? And I honestly didn't know that about you in regards. I know you went through a divorce and had a challenging time. Like, by the way, any super successful person that you'll meet, there's a darkness to whether it's
Yes.
the beginning or in the middle. It's like, what's that quote? It's like, show me somebody who's not humbled and I'll show you a man that's about to be humbled. And so,
Yes.
you know, talk to that moment if you don't mind. But you start asking questions, you
Yeah.
work backwards, and all of a sudden you fast forward 8 years and you go, oh my gosh, 2024 Advisor of the Year. Chelsea, how did you do it? And you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't know, right? There was just all this time and work and put in, but you had a model that you were at least you were etching to, and that's why I started the podcast, right? The new Scoreboards was about just the fact that the beauty about sports is it's this container, that it's this simplified understanding that if I'm going to win a starting job, I know I need to do this. I know I need to become a better shooter. I need to be better on defense. I need to whatever it is. And then you get into the business world, and it's almost like there's too many options. You have to kind of find a singular focus to go, okay, what am I
Yeah.
after? What is my goal this year, 5 years, 10 years? And then I can get started and I can get in motion to do the activity. So I'd love you to speak to that.
Yeah, just like any good team, offense, defense, like there's a strategy, right? And then I remember creating a strategy, and the strategy at that point was number one, like figure out what I'm actually good at, like that. And that was like the differentiation piece, right? Like our message, employee benefits is an incredibly saturated industry. Insurance in general is very saturated. And the reason it's saturated industry is because there is a conception, and it's accurate most of the time, that you can make a lot of money in insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people with really who are maybe very profit driven end up in this industry. What I noticed about benefits really early on was you can be very highly compensated for being incredibly mediocre.
Mm.
And that in its own, like, totally was such a opportunity for me, because I'm like, okay, so I see these people, this is my competition. They're out playing golf 3 days a week. That's how they're keeping their business.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a couple ladies in the office that they're sending business to that they're underpaying. They're passing along renewal increases year after year, and they're just regurgitating the same BS story that there's nothing we can do about health insurance. And I remember thinking to myself, and then this conference happened right at the same time, that like, A, there's got to be a better way. B, Donovan, my husband and now my business partner, now husband, was really the mastermind behind like how we're going to differentiate with the types of plans and designing custom healthcare programs and whatnot. But I knew I needed a differentiator, and I knew I needed a strategy if I wanted to be on that stage. I also knew that because I'm so young, I needed leverage. So I needed to leverage other people's credibility and the access to their communities in order to build my business effectively and get to the scale where people would take me seriously. So the first thing I did was I partnered, and this is actually how you and I met. So I partnered with as many property and casualty agencies as would humanly talk to me.
Right.
And I ended up with probably 60 different partners around across
Wow.
the state of Florida, and then eventually expanded that into other states. So the strategy there was nobody knows who Chelsea is, right? She's this 25-year-old who has had a Colonial Life agency. Now she thinks she's an independent health broker. Like nobody knows who she is. But everybody knows you, Taylor Young, right? Everybody knows whoever else I was partnering with in their communities. They had these established local networks. So the goal was to, become trustworthy enough in myself, my brand, and my business that I could leverage their networks and start speaking to their commercial clients about benefits.
Mm-hmm.
That is what expanded us and grew us super quickly in the first 3-4 years, like massive growth. Then, like any good business story, sales, 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 sales.
Mm-hmm.
Holy crap.
Uh-oh.
How are we going to retain all this business? Yeah. The service side, right? The people, the culture, the things that I've admired about you guys. You guys are a couple of years ahead of me, I feel like, on your leadership journey, transparently.
We just made more mistakes.
Well, maybe. But what I love about you guys, and kind of one of the things I've tried to do too, is just be incredibly transparent always, right? Like, because if you're leading with transparency, and honestly, a lot of the ways that I was able to get to this award, which I'll get back to here in a sec, was by sharing failures. Mm-hmm. This Benefits Pro, which is the magazine that gives out this award, they were not used to people. Like, I literally messaged the editor like after the conference and just said like, hey, I've screwed up a lot of things in this industry and I'd love to share it with everybody so that they don't do it. And they were like, really? Okay, write us an article. Wrote an article, got my name out there in an article, applied to speak the next conference. The very first time I spoke on stage nationally, and now we do probably 5 to 8 speaking gigs nationally on the biggest stages in our industry every single year. But the very first one was me sharing every single mistake I ever made on a self-funded health plan.
Wow.
And it was super well attended. They said it was the best at that conference because nobody actually gets up there. Everybody talks like, oh, we saved our clients $3 million. Like, guess how I screwed this up? And guess what I did to fix it? And guess what? You don't have to make the same mistake I did. That has always been my approach, which from a leadership and kind of industry perspective has also been a differentiator. But strategy, leveraging networks, and then you got to get in front of people. And it's not just like go to networking events. It's like you need to get into publications. You need to put yourself out there as a thought leader. And that is something that we did really early on, just by, even when I didn't feel like I had the money, we invested in ourselves over and over again. Yeah. Anytime we got a little bit ahead, we didn't buy a new car. I literally drove the shittiest car for 11 years. Yeah. I would park 2 blocks away from my client's door so that they didn't see what I would drive.
Yeah.
It was bad.
I love that. By the way,
just reinvest.
So true to your brand and what you just shared. I mean, I think the people that listen to this will get way more value from what you just said about the car thing. Like literally, I really? Love that, because I just think that, and I look, we started the business. I mean, we didn't make a living wage until year 5. I mean, and when I say a living, wage, like the first couple of years, we're talking about $5,000 to $7,000 a year in income, right? And it's hard. It's really hard because I was young too, and I love that, because the seasons of your business change, but for you to have the awareness that you lacked credibility, and then to seek out the credibility from the PNC agents, it's almost like it wasn't as much for the lead source, because you can partner and you can bring in leads. It was more about like, I need to get a lot of reps and I need to get leverage because I don't have the experience. And then all of a sudden now, and then, oh, by the way, while you're getting those reps, you're building your brand and you're starting to put yourself out there and share your vulnerabilities of like, hey, like I've made mistakes. And then all of a sudden, then you're working on putting out content and becoming a thought leader, which is all those phases are scary, right? Like every single one of those phases, like I have those thoughts too. Putting out content, like even though what you have to say is valuable to certain audiences, there's a level of fear where it goes, most people won't do it because they'll be like, well, who am I to put out the content? I've only been doing this for 5 years, 10 years, and somebody's been doing it for 20, and who am I to do it? And I just respect the fact that you can put yourself out there on those different seasons. And then, also to tie it back to athletics, you get used to failing a lot, right? Because it's every single day, right? You're getting your ass kicked in the weight room, or your competition, or you're losing games, or you're losing the drill, or whatever it is. So is there a level of that where you just had this comfortable, hey, it's scary, but I also am familiar with this failure thing, so it doesn't bother me enough to where it's going to prevent me from taking action?
In the beginning, absolutely. And I find it really interesting because that has changed over time as I've hit different milestones. But in the beginning, it was like, what did I have to lose? Like when I opened my first business, I was literally told by almost everybody in my life who I was surrounded with at that time, they were like, when this doesn't work, like we're not going to help you. And it wasn't like if this doesn't work, it was when this doesn't work, like when you're done playing this little game and you want a real job, this was like my ex-husband's family. Like I have connections for you to get a good job. Why are you putting my son through this? Why are you doing this? They just couldn't wrap their mind around it. So when things were hard in the first couple of months, I would come home and couldn't tell anybody that I didn't know how I was going to pay my rent the next month, or, those things. So, and then there was also the fact like calling back home to Canada, and my family would be like, well, why don't you move back home to Canada? So I literally had nobody to talk to. Wow. But at that point though, that's where that athletic spirit kicks in, where you're just like, I don't care what I have to do. Yes. Like this story is going to be a hell of a lot different than all of you think it's going to be. And I think too, like the brain injury. So my senior year in college, it was pre-conference play. I was leading in home runs, leading in RBIs, finally found my stick. My junior year, I had a terrible batting average. I'd lost a lot of weight. And just wasn't as strong anymore. And then I found this amazing weightlifting program. We had a new strength and conditioning coach come in for the senior year, and I was just like ready to go. So I had just been accepted to med school, leading in all the things. Life was great. Team captain, everything's going just like on top of the world, right? And then was a freak accident. It was after practice, and one of the pitchers was doing long toss, and she overthrew the ball over the fence, hit me in the side of the head, went down, cleared to play the next day because it was our first conference game. And I, didn't want to let everybody down and all the things. And they didn't have like the concussion protocols that they have now. Played 2 games, actually had hit my head again. It was just really bad. So long story short, ended up barely graduating, had a 4.0, and it went down to like a 3.75, which, for us overachievers out there, like, how much that sucks. But it was rough, and ended up needing like MRIs and all these types of things. Go back to Canada to do a brain injury rehab program, and that's when I start getting these hospital bills from American hospitals, and I'm like, what the hell's a deductible? Like, what is co-insurance? What I'm 21 years old. I can't work. I had to defer medical school. I can barely hold a conversation. I can't be in bright light. My ears are ringing. I have headaches every single day. I can't sleep. I can't read. Like, I can't work out. I can't get my heart rate up without being sick. Like, what am I supposed to do? So it was really tough. I was like waitressing to put myself through this brain injury program with earplugs in because I couldn't handle like the dishes clanking. I couldn't remember. I got every order wrong. I was honestly the worst waitress you could have ever wanted because I couldn't hear you and I wouldn't remember what you wanted. So,
Right. Minor detail.
yeah. But nonetheless, like it's moments like that where, like, full transparency, there were 2 outcomes to that story. I was so depressed. I mean, never mind just the normal collegiate transition, but never knowing if you were going to be able to go to med school and work again. And, I made a lot of decisions in college where I didn't have the college experience that a lot of people have because I was like, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to change the world. Like, I'm not going to go out and party. I'm going to do this. And then for it all to just be gone,
right,
and be like, fuck, who am I?
Yeah.
Which happens with or without a brain injury. So, that overcoming that, because like I said, there is a different version to that story that isn't this. Like, it isn't success in business and stuff. It's like, it's probably like not a good story at all. It took a lot of years, but that, like, proving to yourself that like you can go through something like that and then go through a divorce at a really young age with absolutely no money and be sleeping in your car in your office, like, to go through something like that at the same time you just opened your first business and have no clue what you're doing, and to make it through that, like, you make it through these hard things, and then you're kind of like, what can't I do? Like, you prove to yourself. And I think, a lot of athletes have that within them. They just need to know that it's the exact same fire that causes you to keep pushing out those reps in the weight room that will let you keep going when things are in your way.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, and I know this is the longest answer of all time, but to get to a certain milestone, so like we sold off a smaller a chunk of our business, which we can talk about if you want. You win these awards, you're kind of at like this really interesting pinnacle in your career, and I find myself looking around and being like, oh, I'm not really the underdog anymore. Like, I'm not fighting for my life every single day. So it used to be I wanted to win, 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 win. Now I find myself like, I don't want to, like, my natural tendency is like, I don't want to lose any of this. And it's a weird ass mindset because it's the opposite of that athletic mindset. It's like you kind of are like, oh shit, now I have success and I don't want it to go anywhere. And you tighten your grip, which is the opposite of growth and scale for anybody listening. So don't do that. I've had to coach myself through it and get coaching on it. But it's funny because those things, I think, change at different parts in your business.
Oh my gosh. You said that was a long answer. I could have listened for
Sorry.
another hour because you just hit on so many things, from the darkness of the brain injury and that repetition to where you gain, a lot of times you gain confidence from going through the hard and not dying. Like, let's call it like it is, right? You make it to the other side, whether it's in, the other side of the conditioning, the other side of the drill and sports, and you go, oh my God, I didn't die. And you're like, okay, I could do that again. I just need to build on. I could do a little bit more. And then you get out and you're going through that in life, like in real ways. Like, a brain injury is not this small little inconvenience. Like, that's a massive thing to overcome that you were not expecting. And now all of a sudden you're in this situation and you're getting through it, and then you get through that, and then it's like, oh, by the way, on the other side of this is a divorce, and your family's worried about you, and you're broke, and I thought if I just got through the brain injury that I'd be good, and then all of a sudden it's this new challenge, right? And And then what you mentioned at the end, which I can relate to a lot, is like we were totally, when we started, I mean, total chip on the shoulder. And still, I mean, my chip is getting a little smaller, but it's still massive. And that's my own problem to deal with. But it's just, the underdog sometimes is way easier because you're like, man,
Oh,
I'm going to prove you wrong. How dare you? I told this story the other day. Like, I had a friend of mine, and he has no idea to this day. He said this little comment about when we were starting in business, almost like I could relate to, about like your former in-laws. We're like, yeah, like whenever you're done messing around, like we'll talk. Like basically, like, hey, give it a couple of years, and you're gonna run through your warm market. And it just stuck with me. And it was like, but it was all I needed to really go, oh my God, like that will never happen. Like I will die before that happens, kind of thing. And then that
yes.
served me up until a couple of years ago. And then I'm like, okay, that no longer is my mentality, right? And I'm having to learn this new season of navigating. And it sounds like you're very similar. So I'm so glad you hit on that, because I think most people don't talk about that.
No, my husband calls it love to win and hate to lose. And so my whole life I've been love to win, love to win, love to win. And then these monumental things like the award, selling off 80% of the company last year. There was another big award in February that was on my radar for years that I won. And then now we're producing a healthcare documentary that's going to be on Amazon later this year. And it's just like,
Wow.
it literally couldn't be a more amazing, miraculous time in my life, honestly,
Yeah.
and on the professional side. And yet
It
I
scares
still
you.
find it scares the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And, any, just like in sports, right? Like if you're, let's just call it like, they didn't have this in Canada, but I know a lot of Americans can relate to this. Like you play high school ball. Well, that's different than travel. And
Hmm.
like, that's different than making a state team and or a national team, all those things. In business, you have these moments where, let's just call it, if it's revenue for you, revenue's never been my motivator, but for some people they're like, when I make my first million, when I make 5, when I make 10, when I make 20, whatever those numbers are or those milestones. What's really interesting is the same skill set doesn't take you from high school to travel to college to pro. You need to level up, and what's hard is if you don't surround yourself with the right people, you have no idea how to level up.
Hmm.
So that's been really interesting in business, is like hitting these milestones and recognizing like, okay, cool, the love to win mentality got me to 1, got me to 2, got me to whatever. Sure as shit isn't going to get me to 10. Like there's a whole different skill set
Hmm.
that's needed, and that's now what I've been working on over the last couple of years and continuing to progress and hit these other milestones. But just recognizing like what got you to one place isn't, you can't ride that wave for the rest of your life. Like, and that's the adaptability, agility that most athletes should be pretty comfortable with, right?
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah, and it's funny. I remember even my first pickup game with the college guys at UCF, where I was thinking, "Wow, this is different." Right? Like this stuff, and just something simple like in high school, you're able to beat your man off the dribble and you're able to finish the basket. Well, in college, you have a 6'11", 7-foot guy waiting for you, and you're going to have to pull up, or you're going to have to kick it, or you're going to have to finish in a different way. And so for me, there
Yeah.
was just like this huge difference. Like, okay, exactly what you were doing is no longer. You can take a lot of it that works, but there's going to be some tweaks that you're going to need to make, and that takes a certain level of humility, whether it's given to you in the form of failure and pain,
Right.
or there's just a level, which is how I always tend to learn, or there's this level of awareness that you're looking up and out and going, okay, yeah, what it took to get me to 1 is not going to get me to 5 and 10, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I think so many businesses do plateau, because the leadership or the owners aren't growing, and if they're not growing, then the company's going to stop growing, right? And it's going to become the container that the season they're in.
So I remember I just spoke on a big stage 2 weeks ago, and it was about building team culture and high performing teams, right? Again, everything is from failure. And so it's just sharing all these mistakes I made, which I then got coaching, read a ton of books, listened to podcasts, developed a framework to build a high performing team, and then now teaching that framework to others.
Mm,
So, and then now the next phase of that in my business is other people in my business executing on the framework and it not just being me, right?
totally.
Well, back in the day, I'd say probably 2019, 2020, we had a rough go on the people side. And it was like I'd essentially become like a bottleneck in my business because I'd hit a milestone and then I did what I do, which is I try to control things. And then you realize like, nope, you got to let go. And, but nonetheless, I had high turnover, morale was low. This was right before we transitioned and rebranded to Ethos Benefits when we were J. Donovan Financial. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that would be like, Chelsea was a shit boss. And they were right. The first couple years, like I treated people well. I loved people. I wanted to do good work, but I was so caught up in just surviving each day that I didn't think about a true process for talent acquisition, talent development, like the bigger things that really lead to high performing teams and ultimately a high performing business.
Mm-hmm.
And I specifically remember really, really struggling and being like, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Like maybe I'm just supposed to be in sales and maybe I'm not supposed to be a leader, which I know deep down is like the opposite of the truth. But at the time, what I would read and look at and lean on for inspo while I was trying to figure out how to be better was your content, which is really funny. And I've actually wanted to tell you that for years.
Wow.
But yeah, so you guys were like the inspiration for me and where I wanted to go in my leadership. And going down that path now and getting the coaching in the books and watching you guys do it, we've been very successful at that. And I think the people who we had 5 years ago would be like, it'd be unrecognizable, right? The company. But you guys were literally the ones I would look at and be like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put people first. I'm going to follow this idea. And it's been amazing.
Oh man, that means the world. I can't wait to share that with my business partners, because when you were describing yourself, I'm like, is she talking about me? Because that's exactly how I felt, which is cool because I think, sharing some of that content and opening up on it maybe was helpful just because, we did it the wrong way, so many times or made so many mistakes and still do. But putting that out there helps somebody that makes me feel great. Leadership's hard. I mean, leadership's really hard. And I think, what's funny lately, so similar in the journey as far as the things that you just shared about, first you're doing it and then you're teaching it and then you're teaching people how to teach it and do it. And then it just continues, if you're fortunate enough, kind of continues to level up if that's what interests you. And I remember the first time, and I had the same doubts. I was like, man, maybe I just want to go back to sales. Like, I just want to sell a homeowner's policy. Just give me a phone, give me out in the field. Like, I'm comfortable there, all this people stuff. And really what it is just because there's a deficit of, what you need to know and what you know. And so that's very uncomfortable, right? And there's just to work towards that and close that gap just takes what it takes, right? So it's like you're either willing to go that journey or you're going to retract and go the other way. And I think most people have those days where you're like, you know what, I'm retracting. I'm going the other way. Like I don't, this is not for me. Maybe it's not for me. And of course, like you said, when you detach from it, you're around good people. They're like, no, man, you can do that. And the reason I shared my long response to your question is I remember the first time a problem was solved and I had nothing to do with it. It's almost like I determine a certain amount of value by being like, hey, there's this urgent issue or this process that needs solving. And okay, like, let me get involved. Let me think through it and let's solve it. And then it was like, realize, no, this is a who problem. Like, let's ask so-and-so what they think and let's connect them with X, Y, and Z. Okay, what do you guys think we should do? And then they solve the problem. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it didn't take me at all. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what else can I do? What other problems can we solve without me? So it sounds like you've experienced that as you're nodding your head, that's a game changer. You mentioned bottleneck. We are the bottlenecks of the business. I mean, that's what we've realized. And we're continuously asking ourselves where we should be involved and where we shouldn't for the sake of that, particular process or system or team getting better.
100%. And I think when we look back at, we've been very fortunate since our business started where every year has been a year of growth. Mm-hmm. And like year after year, it's very consistent and I'm very grateful for that. But what's really interesting is if you look at, there's this year where it was less from a percentage standpoint, but that was the year where I was like, I am figuring this out. Like I don't care what it takes. I'm talking to everybody. I'm watching everything. I'm listening. I'm reading. I'm going to develop a better hiring process. I'm going to develop talent acquisition. I'm going to do our systems and our procedures. And I focused on the operational base of the business as opposed to sales. And yes, we still grew that year, but it wasn't like all the other years. But what happened the following year was we finally had that foundation of just solid business infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
All the systems communicated, full transparency into accountability and measuring key performance indicators for departments and all the things, right? After that, laying that foundation, it's just gone like this. And I think had I not taken that year to really get intentional about the other side of the business, it would just continue to feel like a fire all the
Yeah,
time. But I
definitely.
also remember when people started solving problems without me. And then, what's really funny is now I had this conversation with my husband the other day. I'm like, everyone's so good. I don't
Yeah,
even know. I don't know why anybody needs me.
it's a
Like
great place to be
I'm
in.
yes, absolutely. I'm trying to, yeah, we've kind of hit this next phase where it's like, what do I really want my role to be in 5 to 10 years? Like, I don't know.
Uh, I'll
It,
I'll pretend to answer that question, but I'll just say your story is way more powerful than you can imagine. So hopefully it
thanks.
involves telling your story a lot with a big microphone, because
That's what
it's
I
made an
hope.
impact in me in this conversation and whoever listens to this, and only you can
Thanks,
do
too.
that, you know.
Right. And I think that would be the best use of my time as opposed to, like what I'm learning is just empowering others. And I say this so often that it's, if anybody actually listens to anything I say, they're going to be like, can you say something new for once? But manage processes, not people. So like that has been transformational in my life is
Wow.
everything comes back to a process, a procedure, a system, an SOP. It's not the person. It's not that the person is unqualified or not meeting our high performing culture or whatever bullshit excuse we tell ourselves to not hold people accountable. It
Mm-hmm.
reflects on the process. And when you make it about the process and not the person, it's super easy to give feedback. It's super easy to hold people accountable because it's not like you're a bad person. It's what's wrong with the process? Do we need to adjust the timeline and the expectations? What's going on? Okay. And you have a conversation that there's no defensiveness. That has been pretty next level. And I kind of attribute that to this next level of like, what am I doing? Hopefully, like you said, it's sharing the story and growing the business from that perspective. But it's been
Yeah,
super fun.
that's something that sticks with me. Our coach always tells us is that questions pull and statements push. And when you're as detached on purpose as, say, the highest level of leadership, you're not down doing the role, right? You're not taking the phone call. You're not working the process on a daily basis 100 times in a week, right? So giving yourself the permission to stay curious and ask questions not only makes that person feel like they have a say, but it also actually allows you to actually learn what's right and what's wrong. And I think a culture of, and I struggle with it. I mean, because naturally as a statement guy, you're like, well, I've done the role. This is how you do it. This is what we need to do. Like, why waste time debating it here? But getting to the point at some sort of level of scale, you really do have to continuously ask questions like you just mentioned, for the health of the culture and also the health of the process, which is very objective. One's subjective, one's objective, but asking questions kind of helps both, because I don't think people want to be managed. Like, I mean, I know people
No.
don't want to be managed because I don't want to be managed, but I want to be
Yeah.
inspired. I want to be
Mm-hmm.
inspired. I want to be coached. And yeah, and I want accountability when it comes to the processes. If it means like people come here, and this is probably the same for your business, not to grow your business, it's to grow their business. It's to grow
Yes.
their career. It's to get more out of whatever they're doing, and they see your vehicle as a vehicle that's going to allow them to do that. So as leaders, I'm always reminded, like, act accordingly. Like, they don't care about your goals, they care about theirs. And if your goals help them and vice versa, then perfect. Let's talk. And that's where a team, comes into play.
What I've always kind of realized is since entering the business world, going back to this one thing will like always put you in a winning situation, and it's aligning incentives
Mm-hmm.
no matter what it is. If there is a situation where somebody is going to greatly benefit while somebody else isn't, a certain party isn't, it's not sustainable. It might be a little band-aid, it might work for a year or two, whatever the situation is, but whether it's client facing, internal talent development, everything needs to be a win-win. And those situations do exist. They just take a little bit of intention and a
Yeah.
little bit of strategy.
Yeah. We always say don't just do what works, do what duplicates, because sometimes what
Dude,
works
yes.
isn't what duplicates. And you do it a certain way and you have this particular thing, but it's like, can the next person do that thing and have success? And then the person after that. And if the answer is no, you really got to just be aware of that and know that if you're looking, and not everyone's looking to scale. So it's like that may not be for them. But I mean, I think where you were looking at, I was going to reference back to your story about taking a pause and really improving your talent acquisitions, your systems, and your processes. Like, you would have kept growing, but every year of growth would have been more and more painful. It would have been like, okay, we grew again, but like that's created 16 other problems that now my lifestyle is worse than it was 2 years ago. So by taking that pause, you're like, okay, now growth is good again because we've aligned the incentives. We can keep up with it, all that kind of stuff, which is fascinating.
Every single decision, what I've also learned is every single decision has a consequence, whether it's a good decision or a bad decision, right? And just looking through that lens of, I know what the consequence to the decision to keep pushing would have been. And it honestly would have been health and personal, more personal related than anything else. And actually, so I found out a couple years ago, I have an autoimmune disorder, and I know for a fact that it's from just being who I am and pushing, and chasing these achievements and all these things. I haven't listened to my body and I haven't slowed down when I needed to. So the brain injury was the first kind of lesson. I mean, there were many lessons that I ignored. The brain injury was the first one I listened to, where it was like, hey, you're moving too fast. You're moving at a speed that's unsustainable. My mom had said it to me for years. And that was the first time in my life where I was forced to stop and actually listen to my body. Wow. And from there, I found yoga and mindfulness and all those things, which is the perfect sort of yin and yang to somebody who might be very achievement driven and very like, let's make shit happen. Having that as something to balance me every single day. Like I just did yoga this morning out there on the patio, knowing that I get fired up when I get to share my story and just I have my team meeting today. I'm talking to clients, like I'm ready to go every single day. And sometimes it's like you just really need, it doesn't have to be yoga, but just finding that center to sort of offset it so you don't get too far out of balance. Because my lesson is when you get too far out of balance, whether you're listening or not, something's going to stop you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I can so relate to that. And now, the awareness at first is uncomfortable because you're like, oh my God, I know I'm doing it, but I'm still doing it. Like I had this night last night, like, and my wife could just tell, like, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm just so intense. And I'm like, and then I start getting a little short with my kids and I'm rushing bedtime, just like all this stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And so I have that same issue too, where I run hot and I run that way. And so I really have to work at coming back that way. But I think that's a delicate balance. Like I don't hate that about myself, but I'm also aware that it can really, it can really blow some stuff up. And I think what you just said about your personal life is, it's not that the business is going to struggle. It may just be that you personally are struggling. And what's more important, it's like, and I just know that's got to be a constant balance for you.
Well, especially being married to your business partner, right? So there's the whole just even on your own and your own health and then bringing that home. But when you are in business with your husband or whoever you love in your life, if you're in business with them, any family business, right? It's different. And we've been so lucky because I feel like for us, it's actually been super easy, which sounds like I'm full of shit, but I'm not. And the only reason that I think it's easy is because we stay in our lanes. When it's not easy is when, and I think I've shared this a couple of times about myself, when I hit certain milestones, instead of, I know I need to let go even more and empower others to rise to the next one. But for like 2 weeks, so this award happened 2 weeks ago. Guess what I did the last 2 weeks? I'm going to control everything in my life. Yeah. And and everybody all of a sudden needs me again in the business, right? I'm like, literally, I found myself like calling my employees to be like, so do you need any help? I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, hang up the phone, let them do their job. They're doing amazing without you. Go do what you're actually good at. Nobody needs you here. But I'll start to encroach on Donovan's stuff. And then he'll be like, hey, you're doing that thing. That's when it's hard. Yeah, you're doing that thing you do when you're scared because you just, you just had some success. And I'm like, oh yeah, I am doing that thing. But yeah, so it's been funny because people are like, oh, it must be so hard working with your husband. I'm like, honestly, maybe for him, but for me, it's
Yeah.
not.
For me, it's great. For him, it's an absolute. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's
No,
fucking
that's
terrible.
incredible awareness. By the way, as we wrap up, I mean, like, if you
Yeah,
get anything from this conversation, it's also like the level of humility and awareness. Like, if you're looking to develop personally and you're looking to go to the next level, one, seek out counsel and coaching from somebody who's done what you
yes,
want to do or been where you want to go. Go. And then two, you got to be aware and work on it. It's uncomfortable. Talking about this stuff is all good and well on a podcast, but there's many days and many nights of doubt and discomfort where you really have to work through yourself and work through your fears, because I know within our coaching, it always comes back to fear. We always ask the question when somebody gets a little bit out of bounds, like, dude, what are you scared of? Like, what are you scared of right now? Like, what do you think is going to
yeah,
happen? And then you work backwards and you can get to the root of where it comes from. And sometimes it is, if you're lucky enough, it's like that chip on the shoulder underdog to, oh my gosh, things are too good, but they can't be this good. Let's do something to self-sabotage this, and let's go to try to control something, because, and I think you kind of have to give yourself that permission to continue to ascend. So I just
100%.
I get so much from your story, and I appreciate all the kind
Thanks,
words. But I
Taylor.
wanted to ask you kind of one last question in regards to back to the athletic side of things. Um, this is really a business episode. It's just happened that you crushed it and played softball at a high level. Um, by the way, I love that you didn't know what softball was. Gosh, that was an incredible story. Um, but what would you say to somebody that is, if you look back at maybe your former self or somebody that has either made the transition from athletics to business, or maybe made that transition but it hasn't gone like they thought it's gone. Maybe they're in a job that they don't love or a career path that they know is not going to be forever, but they've still been searching for that thing. They're still searching for like I know it's in there, right? Because I played sports at a high level. I know I'm not lazy. I know I'm not, but I haven't found that thing or that. What would you say to just encourage that person if they're going through some of those dark times that you experienced?
Get super clear on your ethos. So your ethos is the guiding principle, character, spirit of yourself, of a business, of a community. Get really clear on what that why is. And I know people say it all the time. What's your why? But when you actually figure out what that core value is that drives your behavior, you could do anything. You could be in insurance, you could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, you could literally anything. You Instagram influencer, like it doesn't matter. Focus less on the what, more on the why, and the rest of it takes care of itself. Secondly, once you've figured out your actual why, which to your point, Taylor, takes a minute, it takes some deep reflection, probably some counseling. You, in business and in life, your only limit is how far you've progressed on a personal development side. Your
Mm-hmm.
business is not going to be greater than your personal development. It's just never going to happen. But once you find that ethos, that why, the only advice I have is just keep going. Industries and business favor perseverance and consistency. You
Mm-hmm.
can't show up on LinkedIn one day and create thought leadership, right? Like you got to be consistent and you got to persevere. So once you know your why, follow it, care less about what exactly you're doing and more just that you're fulfilling that internal desire, and then just do it every freaking day.
Mm-hmm.
Show up every day. That's all I got.
I love that. I love that. And one thing I'm reminded of, and this is with your journey too. If somebody meets you today, they miss all of the stuff. They miss you sleeping in the car. They miss the divorce. They miss all these things that you referenced. And one thing that, sometimes we'll be at a conference and I remember being this person. I would look at the person across the room and I'd be like, oh my gosh, like if we could just be more like them. If our agency was just the size of theirs, like what are they doing? And almost to an obsessive standpoint where it's unhealthy. And of course it serves you to a little bit, right? Because the chip on the shoulder comes out like, oh, we can do it. If they can do it, we can do it. But people will come up to us occasionally and ask questions about, oh, how do you do? And I'm like, look, we failed. Like we sucked for a really long time. Like that's it. Like if you looked at our story, it took us way longer than it should have. And we were just willing to be bad longer. And because we were willing to be bad longer and stay in the game, at some point we get to the point where that curve starts to shift and things
Yeah.
start to work. So like you said, just staying in the game and be willing to be bad and just know that it's never going to be as bad as it is right now, and just getting a little bit better every day. And I know that's cliche, but it's the truth. And so,
Yeah.
and then some point, all of a sudden, you're on stage and you're accepting a 2024 Advisor of the Year award, right? In all
Yeah.
honesty, and congratulations, that's
Thank
incredible.
you. I
And
appreciate it.
anyway, just wanted to share that before we signed off.
No, 100%. It's alignment, right? It's the hard work and it's alignment, because the only thing that gets you through the night like you've had last night and the last 2 weeks where I'm like, who am I? Like, I hit this award, this thing that I thought was going to take me 20 years. Now what? Like, I've been having a little bit of like a shit, what happens now? And really, not feeling confident, not feeling like my best self right after that, which is hilarious, right? But it's the alignment piece. It's coming back to, why do I do what I do? Why am I okay to continue showing up, being vulnerable and failing every single day, and then telling everybody about it on podcasts? But
Yes.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and, share the story and all that. I think I've already told you a few times, but what you've built is amazing. And this podcast is special. I really wish I would have had it when I was coming out of school.
Man, that means a lot. I guess I'll have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
The other thing about the why, before we sign off, why it's so important to find, your why, or how you want to spend your days, or what you value, and build around it, is because the scoreboard is going to change, right? This podcast called New Scoreboard, it's going to change. We're talking about failure to success. Right now, our business is nothing compared to some businesses, right? Where there's always somebody with a bigger boat, and there's always somebody with a smaller boat. And you have to figure out that internal, battle if you want to enjoy it. Otherwise, you're always going to be looking up and out and go, oh my God, we could be bigger, we could be better. We'll look at all the things that are wrong with our business, or with our life. And it's the same in your personal life, right? It's like, anyway, so not to go on a tangent, but I think your advice on finding the why, the context of that, is if you don't kind of find that, you're always going to be chasing something that will be fleeting.
Yes. Oh, well said. Yeah, that's a perfect place to end.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I know how valuable it is. We've been trying to do this for a while. I just appreciate you carving it out, and I just can't wait for the listeners to hear this, Chelsea. So I hope we talk soon, and I look forward to our next cup of coffee that goes longer than it should, or our lunch, or whenever we reconnect.
I love it. Thanks, Taylor.
All right, thanks, Chelsea.